All right, welcome to the first 3TC of 2013. I'm Danica Montplaisir, and we're excited to be together today. I want to say thanks to Trinity Lutheran College for partnering with us to make 3TC happen. Today we have Brianna Morris-Brock with us to chat about mission trips. And well, first of all, welcome, Brianna, coming live from the construction closet.
Yeah, fourth floor painting studio, Texas State, in the construction closet. That's where I am.
Yeah, that's awesome. So at 3TC, we have a couple different styles that we play around with. Sometimes we have presentation style, and we want to make sure that today is just a bit different in the new year and have more of a conversation style. So I want to tell those of you who are listening in that you can be a part of the conversation and make this a totally interactive half hour by typing your questions for Brianna and for discussion in the question box at the right-hand side of your screen. And with that, first, Brianna, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us what you're doing when you're not planning really spectacular mission trips and sitting in a construction closet.
Yeah, I can tell you that. Well, I don't normally sit in construction closets.
Oh,
so
good.
I could make it a habit after this. But, yeah, so I live in Austin, Texas, so that makes me a bit of a food junkie. We talked a little bit about that earlier, so I'm usually eating a lot. But I'm also a working artist, so I'm painting or working on my draw, watercolor, lots of 2D stuff. I hang out a lot with my children too. That's pretty much what I do with my free time.
Cool. All right. So we received Brianna's name because she's somebody who's passionate about mission trips and we think has a unique perspective. And so first of all, maybe just tell us what it is that you love about mission trips. Maybe dispel some of, or not dispel, give us some of the reasons that you love them and why you're passionate about it, what it is that you're passionate about mission trips with teenagers.
Well, I think mission trips are an important part of any ministry because I mean, honest to God, if they're done well, they can carry your entire fall programming and everything else through, right? So if you get your kids psyched up in the summer, you're more likely to see them back in the fall. At least that's been my observation. Mm-hmm. And with the stuff that's been coming out, like, well, the study that just came out from Kendra Kruse-Gein, it says, so 53% of students in America are Protestant, and 60% of those 53 go to a mission trip of some kind in the summer, whereas only 7% are going to some kind of weekly Bible study, like Sunday school or a Wednesday night or whatever night you do your youth group stuff on. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's saying that 60% of my kids in 4 years of high school, I get legitimately 4 weeks with them.
Yeah.
Maybe take a couple days. So I have 4 weeks to on a faith tradition. To me, that says mission trips are kind of like a fun, like they're a bright spot. They're something that's already working, and so to dismiss them would be missing an asset, really. So yeah, they're a huge part of what I do in my ministry.
Cool. You and I just talked a little bit earlier about sort of how you draw the 60%, and we both talked that in our own context, where you choose to go is sometimes, you know, what draws kids in, and I get a unique perspective about how it is that you choose where you go in the summer. Wonder if you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, so what we were talking about is that a big important part of me is like context, because, or you know, part of what I do is in context, because follow up, right? So in the ideal perfect world, so if I plan like the best mission trip and I've got that 60%, and then they come, and then I build something that I can build off of when I come back home. The hope is that that mission trip is then relatable to the things that we do. So, you know, one of the first things I do when I'm building any kind of mission trip at any congregation I've ever worked at is like, what is my context, right? So particularly now, I work at a very affluent congregation in an urban setting with a specific culture of kids. We're in the ELCA, so 97% of the kids we work with are white. I mean, unfortunately, let's just be honest. But if not, that's not your context, and you need to build around your own context, right? So, so in that case, I'm like, okay, I'll use the example of the last trip I built with this church, because National Youth Gathering was last year, so I'm looking back at 2011, and it was like, okay, we live in Austin. Homelessness is a huge concern in the Austin community, because we live in a climate that's warm enough that we have a huge homeless population year-round. So I'm like, okay, how can we get out of our context but stay in our context enough so that when our kids go off somewhere, we can plug into something that's serving homelessness in Austin, right? So we can get a little bit out of the box so that they can wrap their heads around it, but when we come home, they're on fire to be serving their own community. So from there, then I start looking around at a bunch of different programs all over the country. I'm like, okay, where else is homelessness a problem? Or who is doing something that's cool that, you know, high schoolers or middle schoolers can volunteer at? Which is another thing, because you have all those insurance concerns of 16-year-olds can do this and 18-year-olds can do that, but 14-year-olds can't do this.
Yeah.
And so trying to find something that fits can be a struggle, but they're out there. They are out there. And in this case, I ended up going to the Youth Mission Seminary in Chicago. And they have a great program that you can legitimately, like, construct your own thing. So that was, like, the first part. I was like, okay, so we're going to build something so that we'll learn about homelessness in Chicago, and then we will be able to build an ongoing ministry of service when we come back, which we did. We serve at a place called Fig Leaf. It's a free store. It's something that we did up in Chicago, and it's a part of the Methodist Church downtown in Austin, and we go in and we serve in their free store every third Saturday. And we have for the last couple of years. So that was step one. Step two is the other thing of like, okay, how can I be challenging my students based on their context, right? So like I said, my kids are affluent, oftentimes traveling in luxury. It's something that's just a part of their family routine, right? They take spring break vacations. They take summer vacations. They go skiing over Christmas in Tahoe with their family, right? Which is an awesome thing. But then I'm not seeking to show them the world because they're already seeing it. I'm seeking to help them figure out how to build community, or, you know, to live in community and to take care of each other. So I'm like, okay, how can I build that in from point A to point B? So to Chicago, we took the train, partially because it's cheaper. And then we also cooked some of our own meals. So, like, we went grocery shopping together as a youth group, which is a blast with 20 kids. I highly recommend it. So, like, I planned out the meals, planned out the grocery list. We went to the grocery store. We had cooking teams. They all helped in cleaning up. They kept the space clean. We rode public transportation to and from in Chicago. We walked a ton, right? So not only were they experiencing like this homelessness thing, but they were actually experiencing what it's like to live in Chicago and to some extent to take care of themselves. And the things that came out of that trip were so profound to me, because it was like these kids were saying, that's the first time I've ever ridden a bus. That's the first time I've ever ridden a train. That's the first time I've ever cooked a meal. That's the first time I've ever gone grocery shopping. This is the first time that I've ever taken out the trash. This is the first time I've ever done the dishes. I mean, like, the first were I mean, they floored me. Yeah. Right? but like we were talking about, getting kids to come based on first is difficult. So there's got to, for lack of a better term, there's got to be some sex appeal to your trip, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we went to like Wrigley Field one day. We went to Navy Pier one day. Harry Potter 7 happened to come out, so we went to the midnight premiere one night. But service was the focus, and that's where we spent most of our days, and that's what we unpacked, and that's what we built everything into and talked about on the train ride back and connected to serving with Fig Leaf in Austin now. So.
Cool.
And if Guy is listening, the guy who works with us in the Free Store, I just want to say hey.
I love it. I always find myself in conversation with other youth workers thinking about the 3 terms that get tossed around about mission versus justice or service. And I just wondered what you thought about that. Like, you talk about mission trips, whereas sometimes I get a little squeamish about that word because I feel like that says we're going to like go and do unto you, and I know that that's a thing that you're sensitive to. So I'm just wondering, is mission the word that you use, or do you talk about justice or service learning, or?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And because you're right, I do try to be really, really sensitive to the affluent white community bestowing goodness onto and going into, which is why I try to match context up well.
Yeah.
And I guess I like the word mission because, for instance, we have a sister congregation in Laredo, Texas, called Agua Viva, and there's been some stuff with that trip in particular that there's been growing moments, right? But I like the word mission because even if Laredo is technically like a poorer community than us, or a different ethnicity or whatever, like we still share a common mission in Christ.
Okay.
So our focus on mission trips should be supporting their mission and being a backseat to whatever it is that they're trying to do, and instead of us deciding what they need and then coming in and giving that to them, right? It's a part of common shared mission. Justice is important, and we talk about that a lot because I think in my context in particular, in the capital of Texas, we talk a lot about voice and vote and how they have been inherently born into a place where their voice and vote matters on a lot more, and that they can use that on behalf of those who don't. And I guess to me that seems more like justice.
Okay. Yeah.
Not because justice is always like, to me, I guess it's always had a connotation of like fighting on behalf of. And that's different than mission, which seems to be working in conjunction with, I guess.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I just, it gets thrown around about what's the right word to use to paint the right picture, and it's a discussion topic. So,
it's a cataphatic, apophatic kind of thing of, I guess, of whether or not we have the right language or whether we don't have any language at all. The other,
Exactly. Exactly. We talk with teenagers, at least in my congregation, about the Good Samaritan story that it's one that most everybody knows, even if it's not from a faith perspective. And when I think about mission trips or justice or whatever you call it, I think about the shift from compassion to justice, and I don't know if maybe I'm alone in thinking about that, but like thinking about the Good Samaritan story, that like the Good Samaritan had compassion and he sat in the ditch and bandaged the wounds and whatever, but then but justice was what kept him there, picked him up and brought him to get medical care and have a place to sleep and paid for that. it seem more like relationship. And so,
Right. It's the.
yeah, go ahead.
Have you heard the babies in the basket metaphor?
I'm not sure.
And I think it's a story. I don't know. It's like there's a village that's downstream in this place. And this may be a real story, and I don't know. People out there might be laughing at me for telling it. But there's like a village downstream, and these babies keep floating down the river, and they keep adopting them, and they're like, oh my gosh, da 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 da. And so they're saving these children, and that's great and grand and wonderful. But then someday finally goes, where are the babies coming from?
Mm-hmm.
And so they go upstream, and they find that this village that's sending all their children downstream just in hope someone will care for them is deeply suffering. So then the question, like you were talking about, the shift is from compassion, which is just putting a Band-Aid on and or solving what we see, right? Mm-hmm. That's compassion, responding to what we see, versus justice, which is seeking to find the root of the problem and working there as well. Right. So when you talk about that in context of mission trips, I mean, like sometimes you have to take your kids upstream, yeah. But the problems are so big and out of their control sometimes because they're not 18 yet. They can't vote, or they can't, like, so then it becomes like, how do you get them involved at their level? Like, how do you breathe? How do you enable them and empower them and support them in seeking justice?
Right, because that's often
level.
Right. That's often my question is, like, everybody wants to get their hands dirty. Everybody wants to say, like, oh, look what we did. And mm-hmm. somehow most often it's a place of privilege that has the opportunity to go and do something. And somehow we think that it alleviates, or like, it's kind of like a placebo of that, like, it alleviates our guilt. Like, oh, I'm so good, I did this. And that's like a teenage rampant thing, I think, at least in places where I've been. But like you said, helping them figure out how to work for change in the way that they view their role in the world. So maybe they can't vote, or maybe they can't, not that they can't, but there are particulars that keep them, you know what I mean, that keep them from doing some justice things. But like, how do we reposition them to see that this is your work in the world? Like, this is how you, and not everyone obviously is called to particulars of public policy and that kind of stuff, but to see that it's not just somebody else's job to help those people, quote unquote, those people.
Right, because the thing is that, like, in my opinion, in my experience, when you're actually really doing justice work, or like that service justice mission, hoobly jubilee wibbly wobbly language thing, it becomes so rackingly uncomfortable that you have no idea how to respond. Mm-hmm. Like, as a human being, you're like, oh God. And if you can't get there, like, you're not really doing it, because like, that's the problem that I have with, like, stuff like where you go and you build a house and then you leave, mm-hmm. is like, I mean, what was the teachable? I mean, like, my follow-up, if I was like, okay, that's what we're going to do for mission, that's what we're going to do this summer, is we're going to go and build a house, I would also be seeking, okay, then let's go up the river and see, why do we have to build a house? Yeah. What's happening in this community that we need to be respondent and compassionate Christian community to these folks by helping them build houses? Why can't, what has been going on here for years that we've been a part of the problem and we can work to fix back home? And until you start, like, having that kind of conversation in your mission, you're just taking babies out of the river, which is great. Take those babies out of the river because they're going to drown otherwise. But, when I also think about our opportunities as youth directors to teach our children about their spiritual gifts and empower them to follow out their calls, whatever that might be, I want to empower, I mean, I really do. I want to help empower an entire generation of little lawyers and activists. Or I want to empower an entire generation of people who build. Or I want to empower an entire generation who goes out and teaches. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whatever they, whatever they go on to do in their lives, because 60% of them, this 1 week, that's all they're going to get. Whatever they go on to do, I want them to think back on going upriver and seeing that they should be able to see the world. That's one of the things that I really want. They should be able to see the world the way it is and respond to it as a Christian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
Christ-centered person for those, language people.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, going in and building the house. Yes, important work. But
yeah.
also to understand that even if it's a short-term mission experience, that we also as youth workers have the opportunity to teach them about what happens when we're not there. That people do remain, that people are, I mean, like an organization like Habitat for Humanity, for instance. People remain in that community. They are a part of that community who walk alongside and are in the lives, in the trenches with those people before and after we show up and do our good work.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Which I think is like a piece of short-term mission that maybe doesn't always get shown. That like, isn't it good that we came and did because otherwise no one does or no one did, or that's the common.
Right.
I think it can be the common misconception, and so to educate our kids that God is at work, despite and in spite of us.
Right. Well, and that's exactly it, right? So we, because I mean, we all, as youth workers, we also know that developmentally, teenagers are self-centered, which is great. That's where they're at, and it's where we were at. It's, where our children will someday be at, and so they go, and we go. I mean, adults never grow out of it to some extent, and you want to do work that makes you feel like you accomplished something. Mm-hmm. And sometimes what's needed is just like folding clothes.
Or having a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, or having a conversation, or listening to somebody talk. Like and it is a teachable moment, and in my opinion, it's the responsibility of us as youth workers to help our kids see the value in that. And because that's the stuff that's happening upriver, not just responding to what we see initially. And so constantly pushing towards that, and et cetera and so forth is yeah.
Yeah. There's a comment coming in from Elizabeth, and she says, don't you think that going and building a house or some one-time thing like that is part of what shows kids that they can do something to participate in whatever injustices they might come across? I like mission trips because I think they give kids a sense of their mission in Christ. I've seen so many kids come on a short-term mission trip and their life has changed. I was one of them. Maybe we get so caught up in the language and the deep meaning of our trips that we forget that it's actually that quite simple.
But yeah, I think it can be that simple sometimes. But I also think that the dangers of and I guess I don't want to come off like we're downing on mission trips, because like I said, mission is a huge part of what I do, right, as a youth director. And I mean, I've got a 3-year rotation. We do 1 year on spiritual gifts, we do one go off in service, and we do National Youth Gathering, and they each serve as a purpose, because essentially in my 4 weeks we're building with these 60% we're building leadership, we're learning about justice and compassion, and we're experiencing liturgy and worship and call and all that kind of stuff. So but the flip side of that coin, which we can't dismiss, is that sometimes they get it that we learn, and I was one of the kids that thought this too until some other programs, was that we learn that we think we have to go away to serve. that like if there isn't, you know, follow up or breakdown or follow through, you know, the what is and now what kind of,
Yep.
you know, thinking that that they think that in order to do justice in the world, they have to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking about God calling us places and planting us in these communities, and that we constantly keep leaving to go other places when our own communities are suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So,
don't you think that
like,
that's our job though as youth workers, is to be the picture painters, an analogy that you get well, to say, you know, it's all about how we set it up. We're not doing our full job, I don't think, if we don't curate it in a way that helps them to know and understand that whether near or far, God is at work in them, through them, and outside of them, too.
Right. No, and exactly. And, you know, because, I mean, I loved my home congregation growing up as a teenager. Loved it. Freaking loved it. Spent a ton of time there. But the only service we did was another state.
Mm.
So,
Okay.
like, while I had all this, like, seeking out of, like, justice and, like, wanting to do, I wasn't as well equipped in how to follow up in my own community.
Sure.
Right? To this day, I'm like, oh, man, what are the needs of Lake Jackson, Texas? If anybody's listening from there, what's up? You know, like, what are those needs in that community? I don't know, but I know what the needs of the community in the Appalachian Mountain community is, which is important. You know, there's like a both and. We're Lutherans.
Right.
We love those both and tensions. Like, I should be able to engage in the mission of the world and the mission of my own community. And if I'm leaning too far one way or another, then
Right.
I'm out of balance, right?
But and like kind of you said before, though, that the mission trip is sort of the draw, and the gateway drug into a life of justice, into a life of justice and service.
Welcome to Third Tuesday. Yeah, no, it is. It is. It's a gateway drug. Because, like I said, I mean, you know, we were laughing about this earlier. Like, you know, I heard a lot of youth directors, for very good reasons, harping about National Youth Gathering, and that I'm not going to be the youth director that doesn't take my kids there. And I'm also going to recognize that the value of National Youth Gathering can push my program forward, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, like, I'm going to get to know my kids more. They're going to get inspired. I can ride that wave of inspiration, plug them into things in the community, et cetera, and so forth. Like, it's so valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And any well-designed mission trip can be, which is why, you know.
Which is why we do them.
And I think sometimes you need to get out of your own space to be able to see where God is working.
Mm-hmm.
So, right? So, like, sometimes you need to go to Chicago to work with homeless to see that there's homeless in your own community.
Right.
But, you know, I want my kids to know how to get plugged into their own community when we come home.
Right. And that's the,
I guess, yeah.
That's the important work that we do, is to do the both. And, like you said. So, well, oh my gosh, this half hour has flown by, and we could probably talk about mission trips all day long, and still not come up or have all the answers. But we're grateful to just be able to have a little window in about how others think about what the role and purpose of a mission trip is. And so thanks for being with us today from the construction closet. And
no problem.
Sweet.
From the construction closet at Texas State.
Awesome. Just a few housekeeping things. We are getting ever so close to Extravaganza 2013. I'm so excited to be with my friends and my network January 24th to the 28th in Orange County. If you haven't signed up, you're going to want to. It's a great time, and so we'll look forward to seeing some of the network together in person in just a couple of weeks. I wanted to make you aware again of the practice discipleship things that continue to go on in conjunction with the National Youth Gathering. So here are the dates. The next one comes up on January 20th. If necessary, use words with Hans Wiersma. So we got that to look forward to. And next month, our guest for February will be Andrew Root from Luther Seminary, talking about some of his new work. So join us next month at 1 o'clock Central on February 19th. Thanks again to Trinity Lutheran College, and thanks, Brianna, for being with us. We'll look forward to being together as a network next month. Take care.